from CYC, and tonight we have a fantastic Prime Minister dinner. Joining me is Mr Greg Donnelly from the ALP Party. Hi, thank you.
Thank you very much, and it's wonderful to come along this evening. It's great to come along. Over the years I've been to various Coptic events. They're a great community, obviously in Sydney, but elsewhere in Australia. Of course, sadly, there's been so much to be concerned about with respect to the oppression that they've experienced in the last few years, particularly back in their home country. And it's very important for politicians to step forward when they see acts done which ultimately are attacks, nothing short of actual attacks on good, decent people, in countries overseas. The Coptic community in Australia have made a wonderful contribution and continue to make a wonderful contribution to our great country here, Australia. And when their family and friends come under what are awful acts of violence and oppression, it's proper, and in fact it's the thing that all politicians should do, to take up that responsibility of speaking up and condemning these things. And the Labor Party has done that. I know the government has done that, the Liberal National Coalition, and that's something that must continue whenever we see cops in their home country, but in other communities overseas in the Middle East, being oppressed and treated poorly.
And joining me this evening, I have another fabulous guest, Mr Lyle Shelton from the Australian Christian Lobby. Thank you so much for your time.
It's a pleasure. It's good to be with you. Good to be at this wonderful event tonight.
So can you tell me a bit about what you know about Coptic Christians?
Look, we've been concerned for our brothers and sisters in Christ in Egypt, in the Coptic Church, for some time. We've seen the persecution that's been going on there over many, many years, and as part of the work we've been doing in the Australian Parliament, we've been helping to try and highlight the plight of the Coptic Christians and other persecuted Christians in the Middle East in particular. So we want to show solidarity with our brothers and sisters in Christ who are doing it very tough in the Middle East.
And what are some of the things that the Australian Christian Lobby support or are active in doing in the Australian community?
We've been trying to encourage the Australian government to have a much more generous approach to refugees and to increase the humanitarian intake well beyond 13,700 a year to accommodate some of these people who sadly can no longer live in their homes in the Middle East, particularly from Egypt, obviously Iraq and Syria, and for us to be generous in helping resettle these people who are suffering tremendous persecution. We believe that we've got to change the way that we look at our refugee intake and put greater weight on where there's persecution. We simply can't help every refugee in the world, unfortunately, but I think we've got to try and look where the greatest pressure is, and unfortunately that's been on many of our Christian brothers and sisters in the Middle East, including Egypt.
And so what's been your most recent project that the ACL has been working on?
Our most recent project, again, is in this area. We have been working with churches from right across the Christian community to organise a day of solidarity for our Christian brothers and sisters in the Middle East, and it's called Solidarity Sunday, and it's taking place on the 2nd of November in just a few weeks' time, and already 300 churches around the country have signed up. We believe many, many more will, and we're encouraging them to come to church on that Sunday wearing the T-shirt with the Arabic letter N as a mark of solidarity, and to give part of their service to praying for the people who are being persecuted and making the Australian Christians aware of just what's happening over there.
That's fantastic to see. Thank you very much for your continued support.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
And joining us is the Very Reverend Fred Nile, member of the Christian Democratic Party. Thank you very much for your time.
I'm pleased to be here and support the Australian Coptic Association, and especially Peter Tadros, who's a good friend of mine.
Yeah. So tell us a bit about what your political party at the moment are doing to support Christians, such as Australian Coptic Movement and Coptic Christians in Australia.
Well, I've been raising these motions in the Parliament, and I'm very pleased they've been passed, supporting a homeland for the Assyrian Christians in Iraq and greater protection for the Christians in Egypt, which is happening under the new government, the Prime Minister Sisi, who I think is doing a good job. Yes.
And what do you know about the Coptic New Year celebrations?
Well, I know this is the Coptic New Year, going way back, I think 600 or 700 years, 7,000 years. Yes.
Looking forward to join us this evening. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for the opportunity. God bless you. God bless all the cops.
And we welcome this evening Mr. Nick Caldas, who is the Deputy Commissioner of the Police Department. Thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure.
Tell us a little bit about your involvement with the ACM or with Coptic community in general.
I am a member of the Coptic community, obviously, and I'm really proud to be a member of the Coptic community. Nowruz, or our New Year, is an important occasion, and I'm happy to be here help celebrate it with all of the community. Yeah.
And are you looking forward to this evening?
Yes, definitely looking forward to this evening. I think there'll be some great speeches. It's just nice that everybody comes together at least once a year to try and celebrate the Coptic New Year.
And any special memories that you have of being Coptic or something that's happened memorable during the year for you?
I guess when we migrated here from Egypt, we didn't really expect, or nor did we know, that there would be so many people here from our group, from our community. And it's just really wonderful when you go to church here or you come to one of these meetings and you see so many people who care enough to come to these things and have maintained and stuck with their origins and their roots and haven't let go. I'm really happy about that. Yeah.
Makes it feel like home.
It does, definitely, yeah.
Anything else you'd like to say about general community?
I wish everyone a happy New Year, Coptic New Year.
Thank you so much. And joining us is Mr. Tony Abbott, the Prime Minister of Australia, for tonight's this evening. He is the guest of honour. Thank you so much, Mr. Abbott, for your time.
Look, it's lovely to be here. This is a great opportunity to celebrate a community that's making a splendid contribution to Australia.
Thank you very much, Mr. Abbott. Tell us about your involvement with the ACM and the Coptic community in general.
Well, I try to be as involved as I can be with all of the various communities that make up our country. I'm very conscious of the fact that the Coptic community is not only a very strong contributor here in Australia, but in Egypt, the Coptic community is the largest and oldest Christian community in the Middle East. Christian communities in the Middle East have been under great pressure recently, and it's important to show support and encouragement to those communities that are under pressure.
And you being here tonight shows great support for our community. We thank you for that. Any upcoming policies or things that you are thinking about to strengthen Christians' rights or human rights coming up?
Well, as you know, Christians have suffered terribly as part of the upsurge of terrorism associated with the ISIL movement in Syria and northern Iraq. One of the changes that the government has recently announced is the expansion of our humanitarian intake from that part of the world. One of the other things that we've recently announced is an expansion of the intake of members of the Coptic community from Egypt into Australia.
So can you expand a bit when you say the humanitarian intake?
We're a country which has a long and honourable tradition when it comes to accepting people who are facing persecution in other parts of the world. And plainly, there is a lot of persecution taking place in the Middle East of minority groups, including Christians.
And so your involvement overseas has been quite integral in getting some of these policies across. What have been some of your latest countries that you have been dealing with?
Well, at the United Nations in New York last week, I was able to catch up with a number of Middle Eastern leaders, the President of Egypt, the President of Turkey, the Prime Minister of Lebanon, the King of Jordan, and of course the Prime Minister of Iraq. And the encouraging feature of all of those meetings was the absolute determination of all of those leaders to resist terrorism in all its forms, and the conviction that I discerned there, I think a new conviction that there is no such thing as good terrorism. I think in times past there have been some countries which have felt that there are bad terrorists and there are other terrorists who mightn't be so bad after all. I think that one of the beneficial impacts of the rise of the ISIL movement, otherwise nothing but a scourge, is this much greater understanding that there is no such thing as good terrorism.
Thank you for your time. God bless you, give you strength, guide you, and we are so honoured and blessed that we have you as our leader during this time.
Well, thanks so much, and may God bless all of us here in Australia and right around the world.
Thank you for coming tonight. Our sincere apologies for the delay. Unfortunately, issues have come up beyond our control. Good evening and welcome to the Australian Coptic Movement's inaugural Coptic New Year dinner. And all funds raised will be going towards the Australian Coptic Movement's advocacy work for persecuted Christians. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in giving a very warm welcome to the special guest tonight, the Prime Minister of Australia, the Honourable Tony Abbott, MP, and Mrs. Margie Abbott. Under the ancient Egyptian calendar, the New Year marked the flooding of the Nile River. The calendar remained in operation when Christianity spread and flourished in Egypt in fulfillment of a biblical prophecy. A time came in our history when our Christian faith was severely tested, the reign of the Emperor Diocletian. Christians throughout the Roman Empire suffered fierce and unrelenting persecution. Egyptians felt the full brunt of this oppression, but they persevered and overcame tribulation. Our ancestors were so deeply affected by these events that they reset the ancient Egyptian calendar at the year at which Diocletian's reign began. This gave rise to the Coptic calendar. When Copts around the world celebrate the Coptic New Year, we remember the resilience of our ancestors who endured tribulation to preserve and bequeath the gift of faith. Sadly, the same cannot be said for Copts in Egypt or elsewhere in North Africa. Progress has been made of late, but there is still a long way to go before the indigenous Copts are treated as equal citizens. Driven by a burning desire to help persecuted minorities, the Australian Coptic Movement's second major purpose is to expose human rights violations in North Africa and the Middle East and advocate for the observance and protection of fundamental rights in that region. Given our role and purpose, it is fitting that the Australian Prime Minister is here to celebrate with us tonight. The Prime Minister is a leader of a tolerant and pluralistic nation where minorities are treated with respect and dignity and where they thrive and prosper.
Our land.
Sally. If everyone could please be seated. This now brings us to entree. While entree is being served, representatives from the Australian Coptic movement will be coming around to collect raffle tickets. It would be a good opportunity to look through the flyers for the raffle and auction, to gather further information on the great prizes on offer and to participate and support our cause. Thank you. The next item on tonight's agenda is a speech to be given by Peter Tadros. Peter Tadros has participated in fact-finding missions and presented at many seminars. He features regularly in the media for commentary on Egypt and the plight of Copts, including regular radio interviews, print features and television appearances. Tadros is one of the founding members of the Australian Coptic Movement Association. If you could please join me in giving a warm welcome to Peter.
Good evening, Prime Minister, Your Grace, Your Eminence, Members of Parliament, community leaders, ladies and gentlemen. This is truly a historic moment for the Australian Coptic community, as it is the first time that an Australian Prime Minister has attended a formal function hosted by our community. Furthermore, the Australian Coptic Movement Association is also deeply honoured to have Mrs. Abbott join us this evening. We recall the Prime Minister's warm welcome given to our board members during a meeting at your office in February 2011. We are grateful for your ongoing interest in our cause since then. In particular, when you attended our large rally at Belmore Park in October of the same year, following the infamous Maspero massacre of Coptic Christians, and of course, today you are with us for this historic Coptic New Year celebration, which is actually being held in your honour. This year, we continue to remember the ongoing suffering of our modern-day martyrs in Egypt and Libya. It is reported that up to 500 Coptic Christians have been killed for their faith since January 2011. A further 500 are missing. We also remember the Copts who are trapped in Libya, along with other Egyptians who are also trapped in Libya. There is a glimmer of hope. Egypt's President Sisi enjoys good relationships with the Coptic Christian leadership in Egypt. We need these good relations to be converted into good deeds and actions when it comes to putting an end to the ongoing injustices that are still occurring in Egypt today. We hope that the Australian government can work closely with the Egyptian government to further the mutual interests of both great nations, and we hope that these interests include the interests of the Coptic community in Egypt and in Australia, and as the terrorist threat in the North African regions escalates in nations such as Libya and in the Sinai region of Egypt, it is important that countries like Egypt, with moderate leaders like President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, are given support during these difficult times in that region. And on that point, on behalf of the Australian Coptic Movement Association, I would like to commend the great leadership shown by Prime Minister Honourable Tony Abbott in taking up the fight with the barbaric Islamic State. We are deeply concerned regarding the plight of minority groups in the Levant, especially minority Christian Assyrians, Syriacs, Yazidis and others who have been driven out of their native homeland. Dear Prime Minister, we pray that God gives you wisdom in leading this great nation during these times and wish you all the best in all your work. We thank you and Mrs. Abbott for joining us tonight.
Mention the word Egypt, and people will often think of the pyramids, the Sphinx, and the River Nile. A land filled with ancient wonders that have withstood the test of time. A little known wonder are the ancient Christians of Egypt, the Copts, one of the world's oldest Christian communities, who date back to the time of Christ. The word Copt is derived from the Greek word Egyptos, which means Egypt. It has since come to mean the Christians of Egypt. Christianity in Egypt, introduced by the Apostle St. Mark, has largely remained unchanged over 2,000 years. Copts have preserved their ancient language, their distinctive art and architecture and traditions. And for almost their entire history, Copts have been persecuted and discriminated against. In the 3rd century under Roman rule, Christians were tortured and forced to deny their faith. Emperor Diocletian was said to have sworn to kill Christians until their blood reached his horse's knee. And he kept his word. Christians in Egypt continued to be persecuted with the advent of Islam in the 7th century. Copts lived with dhimmi status, living within a system of political exclusion, economic exploitation, religious persecution, and social degradation. In recent times, Copts have been systematically targeted and persecuted. Their churches have been burned, their businesses and livelihood destroyed. Christians have been murdered in acts of terror, with the law often turning a blind eye. Countless young girls and women have also been kidnapped, raped, and forcibly converted, and married to Muslim men. It was hoped that the Egyptian revolution of 2011 would change things, but it didn't. Instead, the last few years have seen an escalation in attacks against Christians in what can be described as some of the worst persecution Egypt has experienced in modern times. But halfway across the world, a group of young, passionate Australian Copts are trying to change things. The Australian Coptic Movement Association, or the ACM, was founded in 2010 following the Naga Hammadi massacre, where gunmen opened fire on Coptic worshippers following a Christmas Eve Mass. The ACM is a community advocacy group that fights for human rights in Egypt and the Middle East by exposing the persecution suffered by Copts and other Christian groups, calling for their protection and advocating for greater political and civil liberties. By closely working with the wider Australian community, government bodies, the media, and other human rights organisations, the ACM has grown to become one of the most active independent Australian Coptic organisations. Following the ACM's widespread awareness campaigns, members of Parliament have spoken passionately about the plight of Christians in Egypt.
That it is an outrage what has happened to your community. It is an outrage which should cry out to heaven for rectification.
We condemn the recent attacks on Coptic Christians in Egypt. We express our sympathy for Coptic Christians who have been the victim of recent attacks.
Copts make up between 5 and 10% of Egypt's population, but they are suffering persecution and they are suffering violence in a growing concern.
Media outlets, both locally and abroad, have reported on the ACM's activist campaigns, broadcasting the injustices suffered by Copts to the wider community.
Burning churches, mosques, schools, orphanages. What sort of peaceful protesters shoot point blank a 10-year-old girl in the head as she's leaving from Bible class?
The ACM's demands are moderate and legitimate, calling for Christians to be recognised as equal before the law, afforded the freedom to express their religion, language and culture without hindrance. Egypt as a democracy must recognise the fundamental rights of Copts within the very fabric of its society, in its constitution, through its laws, judicial system and its educational institutions. Christians in Egypt form the largest Christian group in the entire Middle East and North African region. Their protection is vital, not just for Egypt, but for the entire world. More must be done. The ACM calls on Western governments, including Australia, to speak out against the persecution of Copts and other Christians in the Middle East, and to grant them safe haven in instances where they've been forced to flee. the ACN aims to be a voice to the voiceless, to take their stories and plight to the Australian government and its people, for them to be heard. One voice, one purpose. Will you join your voice to ours?
We thank Charismatic Productions for producing that high quality and riveting presentation. I'll now invite Senator the Honourable Concetta Fierravanti-Wells to the stage to introduce the Prime Minister.
Thank you. Prime Minister, Mrs Margie Abbott, my federal colleagues Deb O'Neill, Craig Kelly, Nicholas Vivaris, state parliamentary colleagues Minister Dominello, Marie Ficarra, Greg Donnelly, Paul Green and the Honourable Fred Nile, Your Grace, Your Eminence, Peter Tadros and your board members of the Australian Coptic Movement Association, councillors, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It's my very great pleasure as Parliamentary Secretary with special responsibilities for multicultural affairs to join you at this inaugural dinner and extend my very best wishes for your New Year celebrations. Nowruz. Tonight affords me the opportunity to acknowledge and pay my deepest respects to Australians of the Coptic Church, which holds a very special place in the history of Christian civilisation. I congratulate the Australian Coptic Movement Association on the work that you do and acknowledge that your community has a large and active presence across Sydney, especially here in Brighton. As the daughter of migrants myself, I understand very well the sacrifices that many of you have made to build a better life for yourselves and your families, and in so doing have added to the rich fabric of our cultural diversity. Tonight, I also have the privilege of introducing the Prime Minister. I have known the Prime Minister since we were both staffers in the early 1990s. I'm proud of his achievements, his policy scholarship, and his dignified approach as our Prime Minister. He is a great leader whose guidance has given our nation renewed hope and focus. I'm truly honoured to serve in his ministry. The Prime Minister has been an advocate of the merits of our cultural diversity and the strength of Australian multiculturalism, which embodies a commitment towards the common elements that unite us, combined with the respect and understanding of our social, cultural and religious differences according to Australian law. He has done this in a collaborative way by reinforcing our social cohesion whilst remaining vigilant in addressing any national security threats. Through his leadership, Australia is engaging in important humanitarian work across the globe, and in particular in the Middle East. But we are also balancing our international obligations to express our revulsion against the ISIL death cult through our decisive military response. It takes a special and real leader to juggle so many challenges whilst remaining measured and resolute at all times. The Prime Minister's presence this evening is a testament to the value of the partnership and friendship we share with the Coptic Australian community. We admire your traditions and universal commitment towards Australia. It is wonderful to be here amongst so many friends, and I would now ask you to join me in welcoming the Prime Minister of Australia, the Honourable Tony Abbott.
Well, Connie, thank you so much. It is a thrill to be here. It's an honour to be in the presence of so many of my parliamentary colleagues, yourself, the Parliamentary Secretary for Community Affairs, Minister Dominello from the State Government, Nick Vivaris, the local member, Craig Kelly is here, Deb O'Neill is here. I understand there are a number of state MPs here, and of course Marie Ficarra, my old friend, Fred Nile, my old friend. It's great that so many people from our federal and state parliaments are here today to celebrate the Coptic community here in Australia and to acknowledge the Coptic community in Egypt, the oldest and largest Christian community in the Middle East, and a community which, as we've been reminded earlier this evening, is under enormous pressure. It's not the only community under pressure in the Middle East, but it is a community under pressure. And here in Australia, we extend our support, our solidarity, our respect to all communities under pressure right around the world, but particularly in the Middle East, the birthplace of so much which is good, the cradle of civilization, and yet as well as the cradle of civilization right now, the scene of some of the most horrific events of modern times. It's good as we look at the horrific events unfolding in northern Iraq and Syria to be here in this country of ours, in the bosom of Australia, a country which has long extended a warm welcome to people from the four corners of the earth, a country which has embraced as brothers and sisters everyone who comes here to become Australian, to make a life here, to aspire to a better life for their children and their grandchildren. This is the Australian way. It always has been, and as far as I'm concerned, it always will be. But yes, there are those who would do us harm at home and abroad. And it's important that even a free, tolerant, pluralist society such as ours defend itself appropriately against those who would do us harm. As you know, the Commonwealth Government has recently increased funding for our police, security and intelligence services here in Australia. Not because we particularly want to increase security. We are by nature people who wish to go about our lives entirely free of this kind of influence. But it's necessary sometimes to protect the community against extreme elements who don't share that general Australian love of freedom, of pluralism, who don't share that general Australian respect for all, an understanding that everyone should be able to live his or her life as he or she chooses. Everyone should be able to worship freely as he or she chooses. And so we have spent an additional $630 million. We've committed an additional $630 million over the forward estimates period to our police, intelligence and security organisations. And as you know, we have committed a military force to the Middle East because it is important that we protect our values, our interests, our citizens and our way of life at home and abroad. This ISIL movement, I refuse to call it Islamic State because it is neither Islamic nor a state in any meaningful sense. As my friend President Najib of Malaysia has pointed out, ISIL is against God, against Islam and against humanity. Decent people everywhere, regardless of their religion, understand that ISIL is a death cult that has effectively declared war on the world. This is my understanding. This is the understanding of the opposition in the federal parliament. This is the understanding of decent people everywhere. I have recently been to the United Nations and it's been my honour to speak at the United Nations, not just with people like the President of the United States and the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, but with some of the major leaders of the Middle East, the President of Egypt, the President of Turkey, the Prime Minister of Lebanon, the King of Jordan, the Prime Minister of Iraq. They all understand that ISIL is a menace to everyone. They all understand that ISIL kills without compunction. Shia, Sunni, Yazidi, Turkmen, Kurd and Christian. This is why it is in the interests of civilization that this movement be disrupted, degraded and defeated. But in the end, you cannot beat an extreme ideology. You cannot beat a terrorist movement simply with military force. In the end, what is required is a better heart and a new spirit. That is what is required. And while the rise of ISIL has been an almost unmitigated disaster, even in the midst of this darkening time, there are some signs of hope. Middle Eastern countries that have long treated each other as bitter enemies, now working constructively together against the ISIL foe. And it's just possible that watching these depravities, these atrocities, might finally convince all people, all faiths, all cultures that it's never right to mistreat someone else in the name of God. That in the end, the things that unite us are more important than anything that divides us. What must we understand? I suppose in the end, what we must understand is that gospel lesson that we must treat others as we would have them treat us, that we must love our neighbours as we love ourselves. It's a hard lesson. It's a very hard lesson. None of us fully live up to it, and yet we must always aspire better to realise this great commandment if we are to have a better country, if we are to be better people, and if we are to live in a better world. So, my friends, I say thank you for coming together tonight. Thank you for coming together in support and solidarity with good people everywhere. Thank you for your acknowledgement that all human beings have equal rights and dignity, and that all human beings, wherever they are, should be free to live and worship in their own way, provided they respect the equal rights of others to do likewise. Thank you so much. It's a great night, and Happy New Year to the Coptic community.
Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister, for your enjoyable and inspiring speech. The Australian Coptic movement is grateful for the strong interest that you have in our cause and for your support and solidarity with the Coptic community. The Australian Coptic movement is pleased to see that our cause for justice and human rights enjoys the support of both sides of politics, as evidenced by the presence here tonight of Senator Deborah O'Neill, who is here to deliver a speech on behalf of the Leader of the Opposition, the Honourable Bill Shorten MP. I invite her to come forward onto the stage.
Well, good evening, everyone. Can I commence my remarks by acknowledging that we are gathering tonight on the traditional land of the custodians of this place, and I pay my respects to elders past and present. I'd also like to acknowledge the Honourable Tony Abbott, Prime Minister, and his wife Margie, who are very much celebrated here in this on this special occasion, the inaugural occasion in which Coptic New Year is being celebrated. Can I acknowledge also my federal colleagues, Senator Conchetta for Vanty Wells, Mr Nick Favaris, a member for Barton, Mr Craig Kelly, member for Hughes. From the state government, Greg Donnelly, MLC, representing John Robertson, the Leader of the Opposition, Mr Victor Dominello, MLC, Reverend Fred Nile, MLC, the Honourable Paul Green, MLC, the Honourable Marie Fakara, Your Grace, Bishop Daniel, Your Eminence, Archbishop Moray Malicious Malki, Deputy Commissioner Nick Caldas, Mr Peter Tardos, thank you for your speech, the community leaders, and can I particularly acknowledge the Australian Coptic Movement Association and Monica McHale, I think, whose words we saw in that presentation reveal a great heart and quest for justice by those who are gathering here with the support of their community this evening. Community leaders, one and all. It is my great pleasure to be here tonight to represent the Honourable Bill Shorten MP, Leader of the Australian Labor Party. Mr Shorten sends his best regards to all of you here tonight, and indeed to all Coptic Orthodox Christians throughout Australia. Bill sends his sincere apologies and wishes he could join you in person, but I have to say that in his absence I am delighted to have the pleasure of making your company this evening and to be with you on this very special occasion. We both wish you a very happy and safe Coptic New Year. It's clear from tonight's event that Coptic New Year is a significant celebration for Coptic Orthodox Christians. It's also a time for all Australians to rejoice in the rich success of the multicultural, multi-faith society we have built together. Tonight, as the new year commences, and we reflect on times past and those that we hope are yet ahead, I want to acknowledge the outstanding contribution the Coptic community has made to Australia, and indeed to all the countries in which it still has such a power to change lives. The Australian Labor Party has always recognised the extraordinary contribution that migrants make to our country, whether they come by choice or whether, sadly, they flee persecution. Migrants are a rich source of inspiration to us all, and as Christian migrants, your particular expressions of faithfulness to the teachings of Christ are incredibly valuable expressions of Christ's teaching of acceptance of others. Jesus taught us valuable lessons for all time. We know as Christians that he calls on us to do that hard work of accepting others, but he does it in a context of a belief of the equality of all life and the value of all lives. His is a life-giving, a life-enhancing call. As people of faith here in Australia, Coptic Christians who hold firm to your beliefs and your faith are accepted as a gift in our diverse cosmopolitan society. Sadly, for many Coptic Christians in other parts of the world, peaceful coexistence is their prayer, not their reality. I note with genuine concern for you and your Coptic family around the world the escalation in attacks on Christians. This is particularly the case in Iraq, in Syria and in Egypt, and indeed, as you have mentioned this evening, across Northern Africa. This last year, the TV footage of the flight of Christians evacuating Mosul has awakened millions more around the world to the plight of Christians in the Middle East and North Africa. The atrocities we are seeing from ISIL remind us that there are people who, fueled by hate, are willing to perpetrate crimes against humanity. As faithful communities in our cosmopolitan world, we're called to a gospel of love. But love also calls us to act in defence of the innocent. And indeed, it is the responsibility of the entire world community to respond to the terrible threat of the evil that is ISIL. As Australians who believe in fundamental human values, in peace, in freedom to live out one's faith, free from tyranny, in the right to work and to move freely and safely, to worship freely, we are called to give action to our beliefs in this democracy and around the world. This evening marks the end of a year in very difficult times for the people of the Middle East and Egypt. It's been a difficult year for people of goodwill, but it also marks the beginning of a new year, And with that turn to the new year, we must resolve with hope that in union with those around the world who will not turn away from atrocities inflicted on the weak and vulnerable, the new year will see better lives for Coptic Christians and people of goodwill everywhere in this amazing world that we share. In closing, I know that many of you this evening will be reflecting on this year that has gone. You'll be thinking of family and friends, of churches in which you've worshipped that are no longer there, of family members lost, of faithful, hopeful hearts burdened with the sorrow and sadness of loss and grief. Our thoughts and prayers are with you and all of those at this difficult time. But on behalf of the Federal Parliamentary Labor Party, I would like to close by wishing you a hopeful, peaceful, joyous New Year as a Coptic Orthodox community. Thank you very much for making me so welcome this evening.
My brother, that's why I have him. He helps me with the microphone. Yeah, it's a great event, great to be a part of it. Of course, we're very Coptic, and that is our heritage, and we share our surname is shared with the name of the Pope, Pope Tuadros. So I get great pleasure when he's mentioned in the Mass, because I go, wow, it's great. We're like that. So hopefully I'll get to heaven through him, which would be great. But yeah, it's great to be playing in front of the Prime Minister. We actually did perform for you once before, but you weren't Prime Minister then, so this is extra special. And Julia Gillard was on the table as well, so there you go. So we're going to play a couple of short pieces for you. And I apologise for my moustache, by the way. This is a new look I'm working on at the moment. I did have a 7-month-year-old beard on my face. I was trying to look like a Coptic priest, but I was getting other looks, especially at these current times, so I had to change. But it did go well, because I went from being a suspect to someone going, oh, you're French. So I thought, oh, that's good. That's definitely a win. So it's definitely a win. So here we go. First piece we're going to play is a piece of mine. We thought we'd play something I composed, we performed with the Australian Chamber Orchestra, a piece called El Alamein. Of course, the Anzacs played a great role there in World War II, and I wrote a piece to commemorate their services, and, you know, a little bit of Middle Eastern and our Australian upbringing. So this is a piece called Alamein, the first one ever.
pray for our persecutors, not to endure persecution only, but to pray for our persecutors. Our Lord Jesus Christ said in Matthew chapter 5, verse 44, pray for those who spitefully use you and persecute you. The true Christian must pray to the Almighty Lord to open the eyes and the minds of our persecutors for the true meaning of life and for the eternal life after death. And the third point is difficulty. Yes, we can endure persecution except from God. And here, I would love to say with proud, we accept the authority, the Australian authority and other authorities, because they are appointed from God. Also, the authorities or the people in the position.
Thank you for joining us this evening in the inaugural commemoration of the Nowruz Coptic New Year with the Prime Minister Tony Abbott and his lovely wife, and also joining me is Senator Deborah O'Neill. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, it's a pleasure, Susie.
So what is your role in Parliament?
Well, I'm a Senator for the state of New South Wales, and I have a number of committees that I participate in, and I'm very pleased to have the chairmanship of the Select Committee on Health. So we're looking into all the areas around health, particularly the proposed changes to the federal-state relations and the breakdown of Medicare local, things like the $7 GP tax. We think these are really important issues that need great scrutiny because they will significantly impact, particularly on the most vulnerable in the community. So that's part of the work that I've been doing in the Parliament recently.
And thank you so much for your speech earlier this evening as well. Just want to touch on a few points that you mentioned in the speech about the Coptic Christians and persecution, and how long have the government known about things like this? Is it just recently in the wake of terrorism, or has it been an ongoing issue that they're finally raising their voices to?
Well, I think persecution of people of other faiths has been around for time immemorial. Somehow, as human beings, we seem to have a bit of difficulty in coping with the fact that people might live a little differently from us. They might want to worship differently. The reality is, in this modern cosmopolitan world, we can learn from times when the world found peace by accepting that other people can live differently and holding true to a deep Christian faith which asks us not just to praise God in our own way, but to accept the otherness and the diversity of this world that He's created for us to live in. So I guess the call to love is a radical call, and a call to love sometimes means that we have to actually make sure that we take action to protect the most vulnerable, because when evil walks, and I think right now in the shape of ISIL, we are seeing what evil on earth looks like. It's an awakening for an entire generation of young people, I think, that there is a good, life-giving way to live and that there is a destructive and evil way. And we've never seen it perhaps more clearly. And it's not an accident that it's happening in this time when social media and visual imagery are connecting us right across the world. So in this terrible, terrible time, and this time of such death and grief and loss and abuse of our fellow human beings by those who would do the wrong thing, we have the opportunity to make a change, to awaken to a better way of living together here on the planet, and to defend those who are most vulnerable in the midst of this crisis.
Thank you so much for your time. Thank you. And the guest list continues with the Minister for Communities, Mr. Victor Dominello. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you for having me.
So tell us a bit about what you know about the Coptic people.
They're extremely loyal, faithful, hard-working, law-abiding, community-minded people. If you look at the demographics of their contribution to the Australian and New South Wales way of life, it's extraordinary, their civic contribution. They are a real role model for other communities.
And how long have you been the Minister in this area for?
Almost 4 years.
And how are you finding everyday sort of situations dealing?
Challenging, busy, but it's an enjoyable privilege to be in, to be the Minister for Citizenship and Communities, because you get to see a lot of people right throughout New South Wales and Australia.
What are some new policies that you're wishing to implement soon into the community for the better?
Well, the things that we're focusing on now is making sure that in relation to our diversity, we celebrate that, but at the same, if not by equal measure, that we also celebrate the things that unite us together as Australians. So multicultural practice is very successful because with one hand you wave the flag of diversity and your heritage, with the other flag you wave the things that unite us, such as our Indigenous history, national days, volunteering and the like.
Looking forward to this evening?
Yes, I am.
Thank you so much for your time. And joining me now is Dr. Iman Shurubin, who is a distinguished member of the Coptic community. Thank you so much for your time.
It's my pleasure.
What exactly is your role within our Coptic community?
Well, consider me one of the advisors to various community members and religious leaders as well. I believe I'm part of the community. I believe that all what we did during the last 50 years of our existence in Australia, it has to be passed to our second generation, and that's what I try to do. Educate, advise, and inform the government of the existence of the Coptic community, and then educate our second generation and third generation so they can do the work as we see today.
That's a very big role. How do you do all that?
I have different roles within government. I work as a CEO of Immigrant Women's Health Service, and also I'm an advisor to the government of New South Wales and government in the federal government in issues affecting migrant and refugee communities. So of course I will be speaking about our community the most. Equally I speak about the others, but of course the Coptic community, as it's very unique, you need to talk more about it, and as we have different members of government changing, you keep advising them and keep advising whoever comes next.
And based on after tonight, how do you think that our positioning now stands, with government, are they receptive and understanding? I know they always have been, but based after tonight's latest functions, going forward, what do you think we have in store?
We have a strong position. That's what I feel right now. We grow from just a small community or a minority community to a community recognized by the presence of the Prime Minister tonight. This is an achievement to see the first man in the country coming to support the day which considered our birth, the birth of our community and the birth of our existence. The Nowruz Day, it's the day where the Prime Minister chose to come and celebrate us and support us. This is a big thing, I believe, and it actually indicates that the government, in its mapped now and pointed the existence of the Coptic community and defined it as a community on its own right.